1 Timothy 2. This message is to the women of the room. Verse 12. I do not permit a woman to teach. You hear that, woman? No teaching. Or to exercise authority over a man. No leadership and no teaching. Rather, she is to remain quiet. No teaching, no leadership, and no speaking. Well, why is that? Verse 13. For Adam was formed first, and then Eve. You get that? Keep quiet, because men come first, then women. And Adam, he wasn't the one who was deceived, was he? No, it was the woman who was deceived and became a transgressor. Men come first, and women, they'll just believe anything. So no leadership for women. But don't worry, yet she will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith and love and holiness with self-control. You can't lead, but you can make babies. That's what you can do. Amen? All right, let's turn to, this was a short one today. Turn to 339 in your hymnals, just as no, we're not ending there. We are approaching one of the most scrutinized, divisive verses in the entire Bible. And you're asking me, wait a minute, what are you doing in 1 Timothy? Aren't we in Genesis? Haven't we been in Genesis for the last 3.5 decades? Well, we are in Genesis, but this uses Genesis to make his point. So we're going to take a little break from just solely Genesis, and we're going to dip into one of the most difficult passages in the Bible, which sounds kind of shocking if you read it. Have you read this? Anyone ever read this passage before? It's a difficult one. We're going to explore it today. But let's back up a bit. We are in Genesis. We've learned a lot through Genesis. We've learned about the 7 days of creation. We've learned about the origami. We learned about the 3 spaces. We've learned so much in Genesis 1. We made our way into Genesis 2. And in Genesis 2, just like Genesis 1, there are 7 scenes. And we've worked our way through the first scene that has 4 mini scenes. And it's all about how there was no water, no plants, and no humans. And what does God make? Water, plants, humans, all out of the Adamah, the ground they come. And he forms the human, and he takes dust, and he takes water, and he takes spirit, and somehow that makes human. And the human became a living being, and what does he do with that living being? Well, he puts him in the garden. And later we find out he didn't just put him in there, he rested him in the garden to work and to keep it, just like the priests work and keep the temple. So we have this priest now. We see that the water is the source of life. First starts with an aid, a stream that goes through the garden, but then we follow the stream and we realize that this is actually a big river that divides into 4 rivers that make their way out to the nations. All these different nations get the blessing from the source at this mountaintop, this hill garden. All the blessing and all the life flows out. And scene 1 ends with God giving a command. He says, do not eat from the tree of knowing Tov and Ra, good and evil, good and bad. He says, on the day that you eat from it, you're going to die. So, we're left with this question. Wait a minute. Didn't you make the humans to rule over the land? Wouldn't it be a pretty good idea if we had some discernment around here? If we could tell a little bit about what's good and bad? But you're saying we can't eat from the tree, the one tree that's labeled the tree of knowing good and bad? It's like there's one school in town, and you can't go to that school. You go to that school, you're going to die. Well, how am I supposed to learn? Scene 2 starts. And you know how scene 2 starts? Scene 1 ended with a word from God. Scene 2 begins with a word from God. Scene 1 ends, do not eat from the tree of knowing good and evil. Tov and Ra. Scene 2 begins, very next verse, very next scene, begins, God says, it is not Tov, that the human, the Adam, should be alone. So we're wondering, well, how are we supposed to know what Tov is? How do we know? How do we discover what's Tov? Well, God says it's not Tov. Well, maybe we should listen to God. Isn't that cool? I just think that's so cool how the story, like if you sit with the story, it raises these questions and these puzzles, and then it answers the riddles. It says, oh, well, this is how you know what's Tov. You don't take the shortcut by taking from the tree. You listen to the words of God. The words of God are the tree of life. And so he says it's not Tov that the man should be alone. And that opens up this entire massive theme throughout the Hebrew Bible, this idea of humanity being alone. And so we know what happens. God splits the atom, and then the scene ends where the two become one. And we see throughout the story, in particular with the Tower of Babel, where the people are scattered, and then from there God chooses one, Abraham. Of the people who are scattered, Genesis 11, Genesis 12, God chooses Abraham. There's the choosing of the one. And his plan is so that all people can be united. Well, Abraham's family fails and comes the Messiah, Christ. Jesus becomes that one who unites all things together. That's what Ephesians is talking about. In him, all things together. So we get this idea of being split, coming together. We see it all throughout Genesis of this division and conflict and then reuniting with these different brothers all throughout. So marriage becomes one picture of what God is doing for all of the universe. You know, when we talk about in Genesis 1 of heaven and earth coming together, this is the idea. The two becoming one. It's all the two become one. So man, it's not good for the human to be alone, so he splits them. But what does he say? He makes a promise. He says, I will make for him an Ezer Kenegdo. Say that with me. An Ezer Kenegdo. You guys are doing that. I don't know. I had to say it at least like 100 times before I could say Kenegdo. Something about the GD didn't work in my mouth. Kenegdo. Which we learned may not be an assistant. It may not be someone who can do for me what I could do for myself. But we saw throughout the rest of the Bible, whenever you see the word Ezer, this is like a rescuer. This is almost always can be representing God who comes to our rescue when we need him the most. This is a lot of times military language. We see in the Psalms, how many times do we see Ezer, he is my Ezer and my shield. This is militant language. So now we've got this picture. It's not just that Adam is lonely, but he's in danger. That's kind of weird. I never read it like that. But now that we see how Ezer fits into the whole story, like, oh, he's in some sort of danger and he's needing rescue. So that's Ezer. Kenegdo is two words put together. The one word, the main word there, neged, is a word that means mirror, image, like opposite or before, like you're right in front of somebody. So he means not just any old rescuer, but he needs a rescuer who's like him, who's a mirror image of him. And so what does he do? He gets all these animals. So this is the fourth thing to be created out of the Adamah, out of the ground. We see from scene 1 that it was water, trees, humans. Now the animals are created out of the Adamah, out of the ground, and what does Adam do? He names them. But the problem is, there was not an Ezer Kenegdo for him within all these animals. He's looking at him. I'm just imagining him, pulling up a dog and saying, no, that's not an animal, a cat, no, a monkey, we're getting them. No, that's not it. And he's like, this isn't right. I'm still needing my Azer. I can't find my Azer. So what does God do? He puts him into a deep sleep, and he takes a Selah out of his side, and he makes an Isha out of the Ish. He makes a woman out of the man. And the two are brought together. This is why, we get this sort of principle. This is why a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife. And the two became one flesh. And we get one little comment, and they were both what? What?
One.
They were one in 25. I think it's verse 25. They were both, after we see that they were one, we see that they were, don't make me say it, naked. And were they embarrassed? No! I'll tell you what, I would be embarrassed. I don't make a practice of being naked very often, but Adam and Eve, this is a picture of intimacy, of vulnerability, of I trust you so much, you can see all of me. This is the picture here. They're both naked, and they felt no shame. Now that's going to show up further in the story. But this is the ideal of the two becoming one, where it is fully safe, they're fully vulnerable for each other, and they trust each other. Now, will that trust and that vulnerability be exploited by another character in the Bible? Yes. You just go to the very next scene, and you're going to see their vulnerability gets taken advantage of not by one of the humans, but by one of the land creatures, by one of the beasts. We're going to see that happen. But let's go back to this whole Azer. Now maybe last week you heard that, and this idea of rescuer seems kind of funny, because in what way does Eve rescue Adam? That doesn't seem like the right word. Rescue? What does Eve do? I mean, it's not a long story. It's not like a full-on novel about Adam and Eve. It's just a couple pages we get with them. And, the good times only last for a little bit. And then things go pretty bad. But what do we know about Eve? We know that, yes, she's deceived. First, she has a conversation with the snake. And we know that there's a curse. There's consequences. What else do we know about Eve? What else does Eve do in this story? Not that much. Any guesses?
She shares. She gives Adam a bite of the apple.
Oh yeah, that's not good though. That's not her rescuing.
Not
but that's another thing she does. Yep. This might be even too obvious. She has babies, right? she's a mom. And here's the fun thing about the whole wordplay. So Azer is the word for help, or kind of this rescuing help. The word for seed, I believe, is zera, but it's the same exact consonants. It's the same letters as help and seed. Now the woman having a seed, that's really important to the story of the Bible. So in the consequences, when God is dishing out the consequences for their sin, he actually makes a promise that through the woman's seed, the snake's head is going to be crushed. This conflict between good and evil will finally be resolved by who? The seed of the woman. So if we see Eve, in what way is Eve rescuing? We can see how Eve is kind of messing things up here and there, yes. And she doesn't do the best. She's not the most ideal character in the Bible, but she's called an Azer. Why is she called this rescuer? Well, because she is the one who brings forth the seed. She is the one who gets the credit for this offspring. The offspring of the woman is the one who's truly going to rescue not just Adam, but all of Adam, all of humanity is rescued by the seed of Eve, the woman. I think that's where the Bible is going by calling her an Azer. Isn't that cool? So Mary becomes a picture of Eve, who has the seed of the Messiah. Jerusalem is going to be pictured as a pregnant woman. with the seed of a child of Messiah, offspring. Revelation 12, you get a pregnant woman. Why is there a pregnant woman who gives birth to a son? In Revelation 12, it's this theme that's going around. It's what Jesus talked about in Luke 24, the road to Emmaus. He said, all this is all about me. The whole Bible is all about me. He says it's all about a Messiah. And so where do we see this Messiah? We see it in the seed of Eve. And in that way, she's our rescuer. She's not the perfect character, but she's our Ezer. Kind of cool. Now with kind of some of that background, we know about some of what's going on in the Genesis story. Let's take a deep breath, because we're going back to 1 Timothy. Ready for this? 1 Timothy. Let's read our trouble passage again. And then we'll learn some of the context here of what's going on in 1 Timothy. Starting in verse 12 again. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. Rather, she is to remain quiet. And those words, every single last one of those words has been scrutinized and picked apart by scholars for 2,000 years. You can see whole chapters on each word in this verse of people saying things like, well, what does teach mean? What does exercise authority mean? Why does he say, I do not permit? Is there something important about him saying, I do not permit? All that might be significant. Yeah, there's something there. And he says, a woman. Is this every woman? Doesn't really make sense, because if you read the rest of Paul, he worked with women. You read Romans 16, it was all a third of the people he says hi to are women who are leading with him. You read Philippians, and he's working with women. He even speaks of one woman who's an apostle. Apostles exercised authority. So why is he here saying, I don't permit a woman? Could it be that he's talking about specific women? Maybe the women in particular he's dealing with in this letter to 1 Timothy. Rather, she's to remain quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. Okay? So he gives his instructions. Don't teach, exercise authority, remain quiet. And then he gives his reasoning. And I've always heard it as, okay, this is not a cultural phenomenon. Sometimes we read the Bible and we say, okay, well, that was for them. When we read the passages about, like, killing the goats, we're like, we're not supposed to worry about that anymore. That was back then. That had a meaning and a purpose back then. Sometimes we read these things and we say, well, that was then, that was in that situation. And I've always heard this explained as, well, we can't say that was then because it brings up Genesis 2 and the ideal garden experience. And this is the way things were supposed to be. When Jesus brings up Genesis 2, he brings up, he quotes the whole, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife. That verse, he quotes it. Says this is how marriage should be. We shouldn't break things up like that. So shouldn't we look at Genesis 2 and say this is the way things are supposed to be? So I would always hear this, okay, he's talking about Adam and Eve. That means this is not situational. This is for everyone, every woman, every country, in every year, all of history needs to abide by this. Cannot teach or exercise authority. And then I've heard, okay, well, teach or exercise authority. Is that like teaching Sunday school? I mean, it's okay if you teach children. It's okay if you're teaching on a Sunday morning, but the elders say it's okay, and they put their holy water on you that one Sunday, and it's okay. What are the, sometimes there's a big spectrum of how that is applied and seen. But for Adam was made first, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived. The problem with reading it like it sounds is it sounds exceptionally sexist, doesn't it? It sounds like men are better, men come first, And women are gullible. Women will believe anything. So the problem with certain readings of this text is it leads to a way of how do you put all this together and still see women as equal in value to men after reading this? Like, what is the actual reasoning for this instruction that women can't teach or exercise authority? Is the reason really then that men are primary and women are more susceptible to being deceived? Like, how else do you see it? You see the problem with this. So is there another option for us? And I believe there is, or else I wouldn't be preaching on this the way I am today. I believe there is another way to read this. And I believe it's actually more faithful to everything that's said here. It's more faithful to what we know from the story of Genesis. And it's more faithful and explains more of what's going on in the situation in Ephesus that Paul is describing. So let's go back. 1 Timothy 1, starting in verse 3. So verses 1 and 2 are the greetings. Verse 3, he gets into why he's writing this letter in the first place. He says, as I urged you when I was going to Macedonia, remain at Ephesus. Who's he talking to? He's talking to Timothy. Paul's talking to Timothy. And where is Timothy? In Ephesus. Okay. This is about a church in Ephesus. Situation. So that you may charge certain persons, very specific. Somebody in particular is doing something that they should not do. Not to teach any different doctrine. Oh, didn't we already see teaching? Okay, so Paul has teaching on the mind. There are some people who are teaching something different. Okay? The problem and the difficulty with 1 Timothy is he doesn't spell out exactly who it is or what they're teaching, but we have some really strong scholars who have done some great historical work. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of what we call like a reconstruction of what we believe is going on. What is this false teaching? What's likely is that there are men who see themselves as trained in the Hebrew Bible, but they're also influenced by some of the Greek religions. In particular, we know that Ephesus is the capital of the goddess Artemis. And she's a big deal in Ephesus. And so some of this teaching might be elevating women more than men. And some of this teaching might be mixing in what we believe was going on this time. We call it Gnosticism. Gnosticism, the word for knowledge, but like secret knowledge. And so they were probably charging people money to get the secret knowledge of what the Hebrew Bible really means. Kind of sounds like the snake. The secret knowledge. And who were they charging? Well, we're pretty sure there were a couple wealthy women who were paying for this. And what they were hearing about this knowledge is that women are superior and maybe you're superior to others. And so the situation isn't just that there's wrong teaching, but the wrong teaching is leading to really bad practice. And so now these wealthy women are going to church like it's a fashion show. They're flaunting their wealth. They may not be sitting or eating with the slaves or the lesser people in the group because their status is so much higher. They may be trying to exert their authority over everybody else. They may be disruptive. This seems to be the picture of what I'm getting. False teachers influencing this group of women who are wealthy women, and these women are usurping authority. They're they're causing the scene. So here's more of how Paul describes it. Verse 4. End of 3 again. So, as I urged you, when I was going to Macedonia, remain at Ephesus so that you may charge certain persons not to teach any different doctrine. Verse 4. Nor to devote themselves to myths and endless genealogies. Myths and endless genealogies. At the beginning of Genesis, we see lots of interesting, odd stories, and we see genealogies. So, in particular, these false teachers might actually be in particularly teaching on Genesis. in the early chapters of Genesis, which promotes speculations rather than the stewardship from God that is by faith. You're speculating, you're talking about all these things that might be or whatever, instead of actually serving people. The aim of our church is love that issues from a pure heart and a good conscience and sincere faith. I love you guys. I don't want you letting these guys teach false doctrine. Certain persons, those false teachers, by swerving from these, have wandered away into vain discussion, desiring to be teachers of the law without understanding either what they're saying or the things about which they make confident assertions. Do we see that in our world today, where people are making confident assertions about things that they don't know what they're talking about? Apparently, that was happening then too. And it was leading people astray, in particular, these wealthy women. Now, if that is true, we go all the way to verse 8 of chapter 2. I desire then that in every place the men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. Likewise also that women should adorn themselves in respectful apparel with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly attire. Don't use your wealth and your clothing to put yourself on a different playing field as everyone else. Be modest. Be respectful. But with what is proper for women who profess godliness. With works. With good works. Do good to people. Don't worry so much about how you're seen. Serve people. Let a woman learn quietly with all submissiveness. Let these women learn. But who are they going to learn from? Stop learning from these false teachers. Instead, you need to learn from a good teacher. Learn from Paul and the people who taught Paul, who really understand how the Bible fits together and what's going on with the Messiah and how to understand these early chapters of Genesis, because these false teachers are leading you astray. So make sure you learn. I do not permit a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. Why should a woman not teach or exercise authority over a man? Because the women he's talking to are spreading these false teachings that they've heard. So what should they do? They should learn before they teach. They should learn before they try to have any authority. They should learn, like true teaching. Why? Because Adam was made first, then Eve. Eve was deceived, then Adam. Let's follow the story here. When this clicked for me, I'm telling you, this made so much more sense. Adam was made first. That means who received the command not to eat from the tree of knowing good and evil? Who was it? Adam. Adam received the command before Eve was around, right? So Adam receives the command. So we can speculate a bit, and I think that's what Paul is implying here, is that Adam was the one who taught Eve. Now, how well do you think Adam did at teaching Eve the command? How do we know that Adam probably didn't do a good job at it? When we continue on to chapter 3, we notice that Eve has a conversation with the snake. And does the snake get the command right? Yes or no? No, we'll see that soon. Does Eve get the command right? Yes or no? Almost. One little word off. Man, one little word off. And all our problems could have been solved. One little word off. This is like, you ever read Frankenstein as a kid? Or in high school, did you have to read Frankenstein? I read it, I was shocked. You know, the biggest shock of the story Frankenstein is that Frankenstein is not the name of the creature. Frankenstein is the name of the scientist. And so the monster isn't the creature. The monster is the scientist, because the scientist makes this creature, and the scientist had a responsibility to guide his creation, his creature, in how to understand the world, how to connect with people. And because he failed to be a good guide, the creature fails. So what if the story of Genesis 3 isn't necessarily just this story of Eve's failure, but what if it's a story of Adam's failure? Why? Because Adam was the one who got the command in the first place, and he failed to teach Eve the command correctly. I mean, maybe they're both to blame. Sure. But doesn't that make... of course, if you're not hearing good teaching, if you're not understanding the Bible well, you're more susceptible to being deceived. And then the whole being saved through childbirth is very confusing, except we learn this now. We know she's the Azer. And through the seed, we're all saved. Saved through childbearing. Take a moment this week. Read through it again. Read through it again until it starts to click and see if this makes sense to you. Because I think it might take a couple times through before you're like, okay, I get it. Adam was made first. He didn't, and Eve was deceived. Okay. It took me so many times before I'm like, okay, I think this really does explain more fully what's going on. Let's pray. Father God, ultimately we know we need to study your word. We need to know what your will is.